We're going to start off today with talking about just a question, and we won't dwell on it too long, but I think that as you hear some of the information about and a little bit of the history about the Central Business District, and then the present and the future of the city that Josh will be talking about, it's good to think about it in the context of an urban ecosystem. And these are different ways or lenses that we look at cities, and they oftentimes are influenced by three different spheres: the city and the natural environment, the city and the built environment, and then the city and the socioeconomic environment. So the question I want to pose to you, Josh, is from your perspective as a professional community builder, what have you recognized about Fort Collins that makes it the same as other cities, but also sets it apart from other cities relative to how these complex and dynamic systems influence the community?
Well, so I actually really like Matt's question, because I think it's important for us as professionals who are engaged in creating the community to really think about what sets us apart. But I'll answer the first part of the question, which is what makes us like other places. And I think for me, it's, our citizens are like most other citizens anywhere in the country. As a consultant, I had the pleasure of traveling to a lot of places and seeing them. Our community takes pride in itself, in the community. And our citizens are trying to live their lives, trying to go about their day. For me, this morning, that was getting both of my daughters to preschool and school, while my wife is back east visiting her folks. So that, I think, is what makes us just like everywhere else. We're a collection of people going about our lives, trying to make sure that things get done. I think, for me, the biggest thing that sets Fort Collins apart is that it has, in my opinion, always been a community that has thought forward as opposed to reacting. And I think that through the conversation today, you'll see that, particularly as I talk about some of the things going on right now, and some of the things my office and the division in the city that I work within are doing, is really continuing, I think, that legacy. I think that's part of the Fort Collins DNA. We keep looking forward. So things we set in motion now benefit today, but they're not really about today. They're about the future, and that, I think, is what kind of keeps us a pretty resilient place. And so I'll be quiet there, and you'll hear plenty of me later.
So that's a great segue, because the story about the downtown and its renaissance, if you will, it was, I think, an important learning moment for the community, and it taught us some important things. So I understand that you guys have had 3 previous classes, one relative to history up to like 1910, roughly, and then water, the history of water in northern Colorado, and then also recently education. Okay, so I think that's great, because some of the topics I'll cover touch on those, and my preference in these kinds of situations is to have a conversation. You can interrupt me at any time during my presentation and ask a question, and then we'd prefer to converse rather than lecture. And so during the next 2 hours, what we're going to be doing, I will be talking about the Central Business District and what a glimpse of its history and what it's taught us, how to do things in the community. And then Josh is going to touch on the present day attributes and our passion for partnerships, and how we look to the future through these concepts of adaptation and resiliency. So my slides today are going to be mostly photographs, so I'm going to be recalling some, what do I got here? There we go. So downtown Fort Collins, a thriving centerpiece of our community. Since you guys covered the history of Camp Collins, I'm just going to briefly touch on that. But I want to talk a little bit about the geographic aspects of downtown Fort Collins. So as you know, in the mid-1860s, the original U.S. Army site was located in LaPorte and got washed out in a flood a couple of years later, and they moved it further downstream to present-day downtown Fort Collins. It was actually located in what we now call the River District. That's where the Ranchway Feed and Grain Buildings located, the former Northern Colorado Feeder Supply. Our historic train depots are located in that area. And this is a bird's eye view of the old fort. And it basically, these types of images were common in this time period. And if you do any kind of image searches on Google, oftentimes these things were sketched out by somebody who went up in a hot air balloon or something. And I love researching these types of images of old cities. But again, this is sitting over the Cache la Poudre River looking south. And a few years later, by 1885 and 1890, the population of Fort Collins grew to approximately 2,000 people. And we have a couple of different things going on now. You're looking the same direction towards Long's Peak, but there's some unique things happening here. After the fort was vacated by the U.S. Army, a couple of guys stuck around, and they laid out, it was Jack Dow and Norman Meldrum. I don't know if you heard about them in your class, but they laid out what was considered or referred to as the Old Town Plat. And that's this area right here. Fort site was located right here on the banks of the Poudre. And they laid out the street system in a perpendicular pattern that cradles the Cache la Poudre River. And that was, some of our oldest historic buildings are located on Jefferson Street. They face Jefferson Street Park and the old Union Pacific Railroad Station. Those are some of our oldest brick buildings in the downtown area. And you can see a little bit different thing happening with the street system that surrounds the Old Town Plat. By 1873, Frank Avery laid out what's called the Newtown Plat. And that was based on the U.S. Public Land Survey System, north, south, east, west street system. So that gives us the kind of the framework or bones of our built environment in the central business district. Franklin Avery, let me show you this one. This is a present day picture of downtown Fort Collins, and we're looking north down U.S. Highway 287, College Avenue, and the Cache la Poudre River is in the mid-ground portion of the picture here, and our Old Town platted area is right here. At the tip of that Old Town plat is where Franklin Avery located his bank building, and that is also the location of present-day Old Town Square. So you guys are familiar with this building, and this is when you started to see when the emergence in our community of the resources that began to facilitate its development in a much different way. By 1900, just a few years later, the population of the community grew by about 1,000 people, and we were at 3,000. And some of the amenities that we started to see in the central business district included cultural facilities like the Opera House. We had several mercantiles that had opened, a hardware store, several bars and taverns, and also my understanding is we also had a bicycle shop at this time. So we've been in that business a long time. One of the unique attributes of downtown Fort Collins are wide streets. And the concept with that is when the Newtown Plat was laid out, these broad street right-of-ways were integrated into that, and the thinking was that there was adequate space to turn wagons around in the street. That plays an important part later on, and I'll be ending my conversation today with you about some of the factors that are influencing the downtown, and also how these wide streets play into that situation. This is another historic image of downtown Fort Collins. This is on the 200 block of Linden Street looking south. This is the Linden Hotel, and this is the present-day Old Town Square. And what this image shows is, again, the changes that we started seeing happen in the built environment. There was a transition that was taking place because of the because of the emergence of the railroad and the ability to deliver new materials, building materials to the community, and different building techniques that were being employed. We started to see permanent brick and stone structures going up in our downtown area. And you see over here some of the, these are no longer here, but these are some of the older stick-built commercial buildings in the downtown. So this pattern of growth was continuing, and it was being driven by an industry, an important industry in this region at the turn of the century, and that was the sugar beets. And the sugar beets, I'm sure you touched on this as well with the topic you covered about water history. This is a highly intensive crop that required lots of water, and the diversion of water from the Cache la Poudre River was very important to sustain this industry. And this proliferated as, I believe, the predominant economic influence in Fort Collins in northern Colorado up until at least the 1940s, and when we saw shifts in the types of industry we had here. So the Poudre River, from an environmental aspect, has had a great influence on the downtown, both physically, culturally, and economically. And the growth that the sugar beet industry and spurred really brought the central business district of Fort Collins to its height in the 1940s and 1950s. By the 1940s, our community had grown to a population size of about 12,000 people. So between 1900 and 1940, we basically quadrupled in size. So we have this long history of growth in this community. That in this community it is always debated whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I think the community oftentimes, because of what Josh referred to as its ability to look forward and and plan for things, plan for changes, it's been able to manage that growth over the many decades quite well. A couple of things I want to point out here in these images. This is, again, at the intersection. All of these buildings are located at the intersection of the College and Mountain intersection. This is the present-day Austin's building. Again, Franklin Avery's historic bank building where the kitchen is located today. And this building is no longer here. This is the old First National Bank building that was replaced in the 1960s by a mid-century building that First Bank is now located in. What was unique about Fort Collins at this time is we were one of the smallest U.S. towns to have a streetcar system, and we had 3 lines that ran in the community. One down West Mountain, one north to Lindenmeyer Lake, and then a third one south down Wedby. And anybody who knows the answer to this question, please don't answer. But I want to just kind of, what do you think is happening here in the intersection? Anybody have an idea of what's going on? What's down here where the 3 streetcars are meeting? So this is a little bit of streetcar ballet that occurred every time the streetcars would, one coming from one direction would have to pass another to get to the destination at the other end of the line. They would meet in the middle of the intersection of College and Mountain Avenue and wait for each other. And when they all arrived, they would do this little ballet and head off in the opposite direction so they could complete the run. Just an interesting little thing that went on. By the 1970s, some things began to change, and downtown Fort Collins did not look the same as it did in its heyday in the 1940s and 50s. And during this time period, we were not immune to a lot of the influences that were occurring in other parts of the country relative to central business districts. And we were experiencing, in the 30 years between the 40s and the 70s, we were experiencing things. We were again going through another growth cycle. We nearly quadrupled our population again to nearly 43,000 people in the 1970s. And the influences on that, when World War II ended, we had GIs coming back to take advantage of the GI Bill and attend Colorado State University. At the end of the 1940s, we had the completion of the Colorado Big Thompson Water Project, which helped to enable the expansion of cities in northern Colorado. So some of the influences of suburbanization began to take its effect on downtown Fort Collins, and we went through a period where things did not look so good. This is the intersection, this is East Mountain Avenue, and this is the intersection of the former Linden Street. This is now Old Town Square. But we had a lot of the characteristics of a blighted community at that time. I'm just going to show a couple more images. This is also the Linden Hotel in the 1970s. My understanding is during this time frame there was I think it was a fire or some event that took place that caused the upper floors of the Linden Hotel to become condemned, and they were not occupied. You can see a lot of the ground floor spaces, these little shadows of what were once windows or openings in the buildings had been bricked over, so there was no interaction with these buildings and the street.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the Linden Hotel, is that where Nature's Own is now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Repeat that question.
Yeah, the question was, is the Linden Hotel the present-day location of Nature's Own? And that is correct. This is in the 1970s, this is the Miller Block. How many of you have had the coffee and croissants from Little Bird Bakery? Okay, this is the present-day location of Little Bird Bakery. This is the backside of the Fort Collins Food Co-op, just off of Walnut Street. These are some images of the buildings. I'd showed the historic image at the turn of the century of the 200 block of Linden Street, where some of the newer brick and stone buildings were being constructed at that time. These are some of those buildings, and you can see the changes that were occurring from the influences at the time. A lot of these buildings were being converted to commercial uses that reflected the influence of the automobile. These were originally historic storefronts, mercantile type buildings, but they had been replaced with garage doors and were performing some function to service the automobile. Another building, I'm not going to reveal what this is yet. I have some images later on that I'll show you, and I think it'll be quite surprising to see what sits beneath that. But this was a common type of treatment that was applied in the 1970s to, there was a perception that old things were not necessarily good things. So if you could take your older downtown buildings and give them a mask of some type, a false facade, it was perceived that it would help them compete with the commercial activity that was proliferating in the suburban areas of the community. Another influencing factor that was contributing to the decline of the downtown in the 1970s was the opening of the Foothills Mall in the early 70s. And it offered, just like everywhere around the country, all of the attributes of climate-controlled indoor shopping pleasure, complete with historic street lamps. And fake plants. Another influencing factor that was happening in downtown Fort Collins, and this is something that I like to characterize as a turning point, an awakening moment for the community. How many of you are familiar with Remington Street? And that it runs from Mulberry and dead ends at East Mountain Avenue, just across the street from Old Town Square. There was a proposal in the 1970s by the Colorado Department of Transportation to change the configuration of Highway 287 from two ways on College Avenue to one way southbound on College Avenue and one way northbound on Remington Street. And that my understanding is that footprint of the northbound couplet was going to be from Mulberry up Remington Street and then would reconnect north of Pine, a near Jefferson. And that was going to alleviate congestion and make things operate more smoothly on the state highway system. In order for that to happen, basically all of our historic buildings that I've been showing you images of would have been blown out in order to accommodate that. That got the attention of some folks, building owners, business owners, folks who understood or had a growing appreciation for our historic resources. And that's when the new era of rethinking how we do things emerged. And in Fort Collins, we always bring in the best, right? So we got Farah and David and John here to help out. And the things that we started doing started to emerge organically as a result of these threats, if you will, threats to losing some of our historic fabric. And the first major project that occurred was catalytic in nature, and this was the Old Town Square project. And this is a public-private partnership that was formed between the developer by the name of Gene Mitchell. This is Gene right down here in the corner celebrating the ribbon cutting of Old Town Square, the opening, and the City of Fort Collins and the Downtown Development Authority. The Downtown Development Authority was created under a fairly new piece of state legislation in 1981. It was when it was formed here in Fort Collins. And the project itself was about $18 million in private investment and nearly $6 million, and I wish things only cost $6 million like they did in the 80s. $6 million in public investment to build Old Town Square and then also the Old Town parking structure. And the parking structure was built out of concern for displacement of on-street parking at the time. And again, a theme that I'll get back to here in a moment. But the project was important because it started to set a tone for how we address the problems of downtown redevelopment. And you can see in the photograph here what Mr. Mitchell's project ended up embodying were three important things. One was the placemaking that resulted from the creation of Old Town Square. Placemaking is taking the public realm and enhancing it in ways that are attractive and vibrant and become gathering spaces for the community. That's component number one. The other is historic rehabilitation. This is the historic Miller Block and the historic McPherson Block. And the idea that we can reuse these old buildings and repurpose them for some or adapt them for uses that will span generations was embraced in Gene's project. The other thing is infill, urban infill, not a vocabulary word that I think people used very much in the 1980s, but taking vacant lots or buildings that might not have historic character or quality, removing those and replacing them with newer buildings that fit in the context of the historic fabric. So those are the three important components that from the built environment that Old Town Square imparted.
Right there.
I'm sorry?
The upper right.
The upper right. This is the McPherson Block. That's this building right here. And you can see the building, well, fortunately this picture doesn't reveal it, but on either side of the historic rehab McPherson Block are two infill buildings that flank it. And you can see this was just a one-story automobile garage type building that was removed to make way for those infill buildings. So unfortunately for the developer, Gene Mitchell, it was a financial failure. By the end of the decade, so the project opened in the mid-1980s. By the end of the decade, it had gone into receivership, bankrupt. Some of the contributing factors there, Mr. Mitchell had, I believe, estimated what the rents he could obtain in the new spaces in the Old Town Square project. It wasn't until really the beginning of this decade that some of the lease rates that Mr. Mitchell envisioned possible actually came to be. The other thing that contributed to the financial failure for Mr. Mitchell was that his project financing was wrapped up in the savings and loan debacle of the late 1980s. So not a good combination of things. However, the project today, when we look back on it, was an absolute economic success. And it was a success for the community and for the downtown. And it demonstrated some important things to us. It taught us how to create public-private partnerships and to leverage redevelopment tools. And those redevelopment tools are still in use today, and one of the primary tools is tax increment financing. The Downtown Development Authority leverages that tool, as does the city's Urban Renewal Authority. Another important thing that the project demonstrated was how the new DDA and the city work together. And today I will tell you the strongest partner that we have as a quasi-public entity is the city of Fort Collins. We plan together, we build things together, we develop policy, and we implement new plans and ideas for the downtown together. Fourth thing that it taught us is that what was once old is now new again. And that's another theme that I think we consistently touch back on in Fort Collins. I know Josh is going to talk about the MAX system. You know, we look at, it's another comparison back to our old streetcar system. And finally, that downtown was a safer place to make investments in property. Now, again, it doesn't bode well for Mr. Mitchell, but it demonstrated that there was viability in this new model for redevelopment. Now, the Fort Collins community, again, that kind of grew organically, but at the same time there were other philosophical considerations for how we redevelop our city centers that were going on in the United States. And anywhere USA, there were lots of, again, influencing factors, and lots of them, when communities were looking to answer that question, how do we approach this idea of city center redevelopment? Some of the things that they were dealing with was reversing the impacts of mid-century federal urban renewal programs. The idea that to make way for the future, you come in and bulldoze or blow out huge portions of your city center in order to make room for the new. We almost had that happen with that highway project. The urban shopping mall is a savior of the CBD. The idea that if we see that there's some success happening with suburban shopping malls, is that model something that we could pick up on and apply to a downtown area? That was another philosophical consideration when thinking about how to address revitalization. And then kind of an unknown at the time was, what's the value proposition for historic preservation as an economic development tool? It wasn't something that was mainstream in the redevelopment world at that time. So that was still where a lot of the risk was. And again, Old Town Square for Fort Collins helped to demonstrate that, yeah, there might be something in that concept that's worth looking into further. So, you know, this is just an example of what the mid-century urban renewal impacts were in different communities in the United States. This is actually downtown Denver, and my understanding is this was one of the bank buildings in the 17th Street area. But you can see the impacts of just, you know, block after block, clearance of block after block of historic fabric. This is an image of St. Louis, and this is what became later a housing urban development housing project. But you can just see there's no sense of place at all when you take this approach. And you see the drastic contrast here really clearly between the surrounding historic fabric and the new thinking, which really, thank goodness, didn't last all that long, and we've kind of extinguished that now in the United States. Getting back to the other option that might have been available was the festival marketplace approach. And this is kind of the thinking that was out there about, okay, can we take some of those successful components of a suburban shopping center and integrate them into a downtown area, because after all, there's lots of space to do that in cities, lots of opportunity. And a guy by the name of James Rouse was a planner and developer, and he started thinking about the integration of these types of downtown malls into urban fabric. And there's probably about a dozen or so existing examples of these festival marketplaces. These are just two of them: Pioneer Place in Portland and Harbor Place in Baltimore, Maryland. But oftentimes what they contained was, or were comprised of, was multiple blocks that were integrated under a single roof or under 2 or 3 large pavilion type buildings, and then an indoor type of shopping experience. Oftentimes not something that like we have in our historic downtown, where the storefronts are actually connected directly to the sidewalks and into the street and so forth. I mean no disparaging, I don't have disparaging comments for Mr. Rouse's approach, because several of these projects today are still thriving and very vibrant. But it was just a different way of thinking, and it didn't always work out well. Some communities took that approach on a very, very small scale. How many of you have been to the Rialto Theater in downtown Loveland? How many of you would believe that in the 1970s, I think it was the 1970s, this facility was had been converted into an indoor shopping mall? That's what they uncovered. This is what they uncovered when they removed the indoor shopping mall. I guess my understanding was the floor for the mall covered the raked seating area and connected with the stage, and then the shopping or the interior store spaces were oriented towards some common hallway. And sorry, was there a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, but again, not the original intended use of that historic resource, and the Loveland community found its way back to what its original purpose was, and now it's, I will say, one of the most celebrated cultural resources in downtown Loveland. So the approach that Fort Collins adopted really was one building at a time, one block at a time. And when you really take a look at communities across the country that have been successful at redevelopment, it comes down to incrementalism being the successful recipe. And redevelopment is the rethinking about our little individual parts and pieces of our community. You guys are familiar with Finnish architect Ilil Saarinen. His son went on to design the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. Saarinen had a quote that I really appreciate, and it's always design a thing by considering it in its next larger context. So for example, a chair in a room in a house in an environment, and an environment in a city. And that really is the kind of the foundation of incrementalism when it comes to redevelopment. So I'm going to go through several photographs just to show you the transformation that occurred with our historic resources in downtown Fort Collins. And this doesn't comprise the full inventory of our historic buildings, but I will say today that over the course of the last 35 years, the community has nearly rehabilitated every historic commercial building in the downtown. There are only a few that have not been adaptively reused or renovated or rehabbed following mainstream guidelines for historic preservation. So this is what has really contributed to the unique fabric that we have in the downtown. This is the Miller Block, the McPherson Block. These were part of the Old Town Square project. This is the Armory building. Again, if you just look at the front door of the Armory building, it was a garage door. Originally the garage door, I think the entrance to the Armory, they actually used to stable horses and in the building, but that was actually originally accessed from the opposite side on Chestnut Street. This is on East Mountain Avenue, 200 block of East Mountain. This is Lyric Cinema. Again, the rehabilitated Linden Hotel. Okay, here we're back to that one building. So this is the get the name of the. I apologize. I've lost. I don't recall the name of the building. I'm deeply sorry for that. But this is the building at the turn of the century. This is the building in the 1970s, and this is the building after its historic rehabilitation. A lot of these projects were done in partnership with the individual building owner brought their private capital to the project. The City of Fort Collins had lots of design grant money available. The Downtown Development Authority contributed tax increment financing to the project. And then the state of Colorado has a very impactful program that is called the State Historical Fund. And it makes grant dollars available, very sizable grant dollars available for historic rehabilitation.
Was that once the Larrabee Furniture Building?
I don't know where Larrabee's original location was. When I moved here, Larrabee's was in where the Ace Hardware is located today. So John, do you know the answer to that question?
I think this is on Linden.
No, this is on the 100 block of East Mountain.
This is East Mountain.
This is East Mountain.
The letters.
On this-
It says furniture on the turn of the century.
This is another incredible transformation. So this is on Walnut Street. This is the old firehouse. This actually was at one time also City Hall. And this is the, judging by the era of the vehicles, probably 1950s. But you can see by the 1970s, some changes occurred in the building. The historic tower was gone. Everybody know what those towers were for drying hoses. They hang them up and allow them to dry, the canvas hoses to dry. This is present day. So again, another example of the partnership aspect and the layering of different financing sources to rehabilitate the historic resources.
Taken down and then rebuilt.
It was, yeah, it was as part of the historic rehabilitation project. The tower was rebuilt. Yeah, it's one of those things where when you are. So the question was, is the tower original? And originally it was part of the building, but through changes that different owners made to it over time, that tower was removed. But when it came time to look at it and say, you know, what is the value? What's the value proposition in this historic resource? It really was to acknowledge and reflect what the original architecture of the building was. So it was reconstructed, and and you base that, oftentimes your approach to that, off of historic photographs. So.
What is the tower used for now? Looks like a very small area.
Upper floor office space now. I believe it's leased to professional offices. So what this did, as you know, building by building, block by block, as this started happening in downtown Fort Collins, we started to see the emergence of very successful retailers. I just want to touch briefly on a couple of them. The Cupboard, Carrie Hewitt and Jim Reedhead, the original owners of the Cupboard, and both pioneers in the downtown redevelopment in downtown Fort Collins revitalization. But also, I will say, great stewards, and I refer to them as our elder statesmen of the downtown community today. The downtown area is vitally important, I think, to the city of Fort Collins. In Colorado, municipal governments are heavily dependent upon sales tax, and that's kind of a unique characteristic of Colorado. And downtown Fort Collins today typically generates between 11 to 14% of the city's sales tax. And I think we're on track this year to do the same. So vitally important. And we do it in a very small, fairly small area. overall, the downtown area in the Downtown Development Authority District is about 700 acres. When you take out all of the public rights-of-way, the streets and the government-owned buildings, only about 50% of it is in private ownership. It's a unique situation happening there. Also, as a result of the success of the revitalization of downtown Fort Collins, large primary employers are beginning to look at the downtown in a very different way. It's no longer the idea of it just being one of the things on the list of amenities in Fort Collins. A couple of primary employers have looked at it and said, we need to be linked to it in a vitally important way and either be in it or in extreme close proximity to the downtown because it's part of their long-term employee attraction model. Otterbox and Woodward are two of those companies that have done that just recently. And you know, combined with the attitude of innovation that exists in this community, but also their recognition that there's a changing demographic in the workforce. And I'm just in awe of how different the millennial generation is from all of us. And I'm still learning about them, but their needs are very different than ours. Their outlook on the world is very different than ours. And they are really demanding that when they make their choices to locate somewhere, it is oftentimes may not even be influenced by having a job at that time, but will look to a community that has a vibrant downtown and abundant lifestyle amenities, move there, and then find a job. These companies are starting to recognize the importance of looking to the future of those kinds of influencing factors. When Jim Reed had asked me to talk today to you guys, he wanted me to talk about one of the influencing factors that or challenges, whether it's a challenge, an opportunity. I think it's both of those actually, but relative to downtown parking. The storage of vehicles in a built environment that wasn't built for those types of uses has always been a challenge, and it continues to be one today. And you know, it's one of those challenges that in the redevelopment industry, specifically in downtown redevelopment, it's a joy to have that problem, because no community that has a struggling downtown has a parking problem. So again, I would just go back to this image of our very wide street, and you know, how it was laid out to be able to accommodate turning movements for freight wagons. That plays into one of the important ways that we store vehicles today when patrons and guests come to visit the downtown, and that's on-street parking. Fort Collins, because of those unique wide streets, we have the ability to not only have angled parking against the sidewalks, but we also have in some locations center aisle parking, which makes it very convenient and a good use of the resource to be able to store cars there. We have surface lots, we still do that. And then in a historic urban core, you always are looking for found spaces to store vehicles, and this is a good example. This is behind the, just behind the Crown Pub. Additionally, we have parking structures. But one of the challenges with parking structures is that when you start intensifying the storage of vehicles by either going up or going down underground is cost, and you're looking at anywhere between $25,000 to $30,000 per space, and more for structured parking that goes up, and then more expensive if you go down underground because of needs to waterproof the bathtub that you build it in and so forth. So right now in the downtown Fort Collins community, there is a conversation going on about whether or not we have the right balance in the management system of our parking resources. We have in the central business district proper, there are approximately 9,500 parking spaces, and it's nearly split evenly between privately owned, private parking spaces and public-owned parking spaces. And one of the topics of conversation is about whether the pricing that is set on those public-owned parking spaces actually matches the real estate market that we have in the downtown area today. So for example, some of the most highly coveted space in downtown Fort Collins is at the intersection of College and Mountain Avenue. And that is where you will find landlords, building owners, achieving the highest rents in the downtown. Conversely, if you move 2 or 3 blocks outside of that zone, the lease rates begin to drop. So when you take that fact and you look at the current situation where we have, how we address as a community on-street public parking, in immediate proximity to the most valuable real estate in the downtown, the parking spaces are free. And you move 2 or 3 blocks away from that epicenter, and we charge for parking in structures, the most expensive type of facility to store cars that we have. So it's considered, the term is called upside down pricing, and that conversation is going on about how do we better manage that. And I will tell you right now, you could basically carry the toolbox for, if you were looking at parking management, its toolbox is so small that you can stick it in your pocket because there's not a lot of science involved in it. It's influencing human behavior, and it's enforcement, it's setting price that is acceptable in a market, and it's creating a positive experience. There's not a lot of variables or levers that you have to pull when you're talking about parking management, but it's a highly emotional issue and politically charged. And again, looking forward to the future, we know that parking is an unfunded liability right now in our community. So it's an exciting time to be engaged in that. So. I saw a question. Yes, sir. Correct. So the question was, first it was a statement, there are approximately 9,500 parking spaces in the historic Central Business District, and they are pretty much equally divided between public and private ownership. And the question was, where are the private ones located? And they are located. There is a very large parking lot. It's more than half a block that sits north of the Perkins. There's very large parking lots behind the Key Bank building, south of the First National Bank Tower. Very large parking lot at the Sports Authority and Wells Fargo Bank site. Large parking lot at the post office. We have a private parking structure at the Safeway complex. So a lot of private lots. In Fort Collins, uniquely enough, unlike, and this is again one of the tools that are out there that need to possibly be explored. It's not an allowable use in the downtown for a private owner to directly charge the public for parking. The way that some of those private lots are managed is that if you're not a customer of those businesses, you're technically subject to being towed if you park there. But in the meantime, a lot of times during the day, those lots sit empty. So one of the balancing acts that exists when you're trying to store vehicles. So that's kind of where I'm going to wrap it up. And if you guys have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, I think we're close to 11 o'clock and we can do a 5-minute break. So the question was, when the Elks building was torn down, what is planned for that spot? So the Downtown Development Authority actually purchased that property in 2008, and it was going to be integrated into a downtown hotel development. And unfortunately, that timing was not optimal because it occurred at the same time we began to slip into recession. and the developer partner didn't complete their portion of the project. So what the Development Authority did with that is we examined what it could be used for in its current condition, and determined that really it wasn't feasible. It had been changed so drastically inside by the Elks and actually influenced by a gas line explosion that occurred in the 1970s, that what sat beneath it was a part of an old historic building, which we thought maybe for a moment we had some opportunity there, but determined it wasn't going to be possible. So we deconstructed it. And right now, the Downtown Development Authority is simply holding it as an asset, land banking it. The opportunities are kind of twofold. We know that property values are rising in the downtown, so as a public investment, that's something that will be very valuable in the future. From the redevelopment perspective and leveraging the tax increment financing tool, there's a finite clock or a finite timeline in which you can leverage that tax increment tool, and that tool goes away for us in 2031. So each year that passes that we don't do something with that site, our ability to leverage our tax increment financing tool into it diminishes. So it's a kind of two different influencing factors that we have to think about, but there's nothing planned for it right now. We'll actually, in the very short term, we'll be using it to stage for construction or for the renovation of Old Town Square. That's where we'll have all of the construction crews park and stage their materials. So the question is, after the short-term use for the Old Town Square renovation, will we be actively looking for a developer? I would like that to be in the future one of the next endeavors of the DDA. That's entirely up to the board, though. So the question was, has the city ever looked into putting parking meters in the downtown?
I'm saying with reducing the sales tax.
With reducing?
With reducing the sales tax.
I don't know that the city has an appetite for. They typically don't leverage sales tax in redevelopment efforts. Is that a fairly accurate statement, Josh?
Yeah, I would. So, well, I think, Matt will touch on the question about the meters. I think absolutely there's a conversation. So there's a dialogue right now about, as Matt alluded to, using pricing as a method for encouraging, a better balance of where the parking is relative to demand. No conversation's been had in that dialogue about then offsetting the impact from the cost of parking if meters get put in place with some kind of sales tax override. I don't know. I probably fall into a very similar camp that Matt does, because I think we both have experience thinking about the value of property, and the city owns extremely valuable property in the form of parking in its downtown area, and right now it's giving that asset away absolutely free. As Matt said, it's upside down pricing. My preference would be to see, and I don't know how the mechanics of this work, extending low to no cost parking in the structures and having the asset that actually has value carry the price, meaning put the meters on the street and do something to encourage folks that want to do long-term parking to really look at doing it in the parking structures, and really using the on-street parking more as short-term parking, and really trying to create a good amount of turnover so that folks can get in and out if that's what they want to do. And meters in the right kind of pricing method can do that. So no offset conversation around sales tax, but I think how do you manage the parking in the entire downtown area has certainly been part of the conversation. And so, if you do one thing in one location, are you going to offset things in others? So.
One of the opportunities I'd like to take with that question about meters is to kind of have the community, or try to get the community thinking about this conversation using some common vernacular. The term parking meter conjures up the old type of things that are in front of every parking space where you have to dig in your pocket for coins or in your ashtray in your car and feed the meter with dimes and nickels and quarters. That really today in the world of parking management is akin to updating your Facebook site with an IBM Selectric. So that is not, when we have this dialogue about on-street pay parking, what we're really talking about are pay stations or pay kiosks that are able to be accessed with credit card payment, with telephone applications that you can be sitting at a restaurant, and if you want to stay for that coffee and dessert, but your time's running out, you just pull out your phone and pay. Those are the types of things. So parking meters, not part of the conversation. I think it's starting to contribute to that. It's oh, I'm sorry, I'll repeat the question. The question was, has the MAX bus rapid transit system alleviated any of the parking problems? I think over time we're going to see that become more of an influencing factor. I think it's right now we're living into what it means to have a rapid transit system in our community, and but I think it's going to be, again, back to the concept for successful redevelopment. It's building by building, block by block, and I think as more of the community and its redevelopment opportunities are aligned with or built in close proximity to the MAX system, you will see less and less dependence on the automobile and the need for that connection between the downtown and other parts of the city.
I'm really excited to follow Matt. Matt's not only is a great speaker and he knows a lot about downtown, he also, I think, set up some great themes that will kind of maybe continue to develop as I give my talk. And the nice thing is, we only talked briefly about kind of the overarching theme for today and didn't really plan our presentations together, so it'll fit in quite nicely. So as the Economic Health Director, Matt's focused on a very specific geographic area, and I get to focus on the entire city, which is fun and exciting as well, because we then have amenities that go, different types of amenities that we get to talk about and how we get to help encourage redevelopment through those. In 2012, when I took over the office, the Economic Health Office, and was given the pleasure to be the director, at the same time we also joined a new division within the city called the Sustainability Service Area. My boss, Bruce Hindy, who was supposed to be here to give the latter part of the slide set that I'll be speaking to today, and regrets not being here and apologizes, is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the community. And he created the division with the vision of trying to take the triple bottom line and actually put that into the organizational structure as a way to ensure that we would think about that as a community. So I'll talk a little bit more about the triple bottom line later. The triple bottom line, though, just to set the stage, is this thinking about the economy, the environment, and then social aspects of our community. And thinking about them together. A lot of folks have talked about triple bottom line in terms of trade-offs, right? We want to maximize environmental at the cost of the other two. We're trying to think about how do you think about all three and therefore achieve optimized outcomes as opposed to trading one against the other. So I'm going to talk, as Matt suggested, a little bit about present day and then about our future. So I'm going to pick up this theme of redevelopment, but I'm going to take it out of the downtown area and talk about a couple of major projects that are going on and use those to set the context to what I said I think is unique about Fort Collins, which is this DNA of constantly looking forward and then reinvesting. Then I want to talk about what else is going on in our community that I think is pretty cool and forward-looking around innovation and our industry clusters. And I'll finish up with where Bruce was going to speak about our future and talk about the triple bottom line in a little bit greater way, in a deeper way, talk about climate resiliency, and talk about what we in the sustainability service area are really starting to focus on, which is how do we achieve community resiliency. You know, Matt talked about the thread of what CDOT wanted to do in downtown, stimulating a new way of thinking about downtown. And I think what for us, community resiliency is ultimately trying to start embodying that kind of forward-looking thinking into our community and starting to build either amenities or changes in our community that help us weather those outside influences better. So that's where we're going to go. I don't mind hearing myself talk, as you'll probably find today, and I don't mind interruptions. I grew up with 17 first cousins, so just start talking and I'll stop. Or raise your hand if that's your preference. We can work both ways. So the city of Fort Collins has 7 strategic areas that it really focuses on. And these are the areas that we do our budget under, we do our strategic planning under, we focus our efforts on. And they are community and neighborhood livability, culture and recreation, economic health, environmental health, safe community, transportation, and then a high-performing government. We believe that if you give us your you as taxpayers give us your dollars, we need to be excellent stewards of those dollars and really function as lean as possible and as highly productively as possible. Again, the Sustainability Service Area brings underneath one umbrella my office, the Economic Health Office, and my 2 what I call sibling departments, the Social Sustainability Department and the Environmental Services Department. And together we get to work on projects and really share not only our expertise, but our different perspectives to try to make those projects better. So I want to start with kind of where Matt ended, which was the conversation about employers starting to think about the millennial generation, which I read recently, something that kind of stuck with me is that the millennial generation is now about 78 million in the United States, and the boomer generation is also about 78 million in the United States. And so we have these 2 big basketballs, if you will, moving through the hose that is, life. And it's really interesting to me to think about the dynamic that is the influence the boomers are having today and the influence that's coming with the millennials as they begin to become more and more influential in the labor force. And Woodward, this was a slide put together when we were helping Woodward realize what they already knew, which was they wanted to be in Fort Collins, and really making that happen. They ended up here on Link in Greens, which was once an 18-hole golf course, then a 9-hole golf course, and is now the global headquarters of, or will be soon, the global headquarters of Woodward, and will include 2 major manufacturing facilities. But as you can see, there is not much distance between this Old Town area that Matt talked about at the beginning of his presentation and their site. And in fact, it was one of probably the biggest selling factor for Woodward in looking in Fort Collins, was their ability to find a site that met their needs in close proximity to what we think of as the crown jewel of our community, Old Town, and really possibly the region. And the reason that was important to them is this millennial generation that will be their workforce now and for the next couple of decades highly values the kinds of amenities that Matt spent quite a bit of time this morning already talking about that are in Old Town. This just gives you a sense of their site. So again, Ranchway Feeds is right there. This is Lincoln Avenue. So this is Riverside or Jefferson. So the intersection of Lincoln and Mountain and Jefferson Riverside is right here. You gotta love it when you have an intersection that has 4 different street names, right? But it's still just 2 streets. Sorry, just occurred to me. So that gives you some sense. This is Walmart Supercenter and Home Depot out here on Mulberry Road, which you can't really travel on much today because of the bridge construction. Thank you, Progress, and we're really excited about it. But as you can see, the global headquarters office is intended to be located here. The historic barn is actually going to be preserved. The really interesting thing is the barn was built in, I'm not going to remember the exact date, I think I want to say it was either 1865 or 1860, between 65 and 67. Woodward was founded in basically the same time period back in Illinois. And so they actually, when they figured that out, Tom Gendron, the CEO of Woodward, said, well, I guess that kind of does it. This is probably the right site for us. And they're going to preserve it. And actually, they're talking about either having it be kind of a visitor center to talk about the history of their business as well as the area, or possibly use it as a training center. So that it'd be a conference room, would be the primary space, much like this, where folks could, either from the community or from their private business, actually use the facility. And then they have plans for their manufacturing facilities here around it. So, I think what I'm trying to stress here is that this theme of redevelopment and kind of figuring out how do we leverage the assets within our community to continue to respond to the fact that people, we are a top 10 community. People are coming here because they want to be here, and then, as Matt said, figuring out what they do for a profession is going to force us, I think, as we keep managing that growth, to look at our assets in new ways and figure out how to use them to higher and better purposes. And this is, I think, an excellent example of that. Another example, which I think is an important complement to downtown, and Matt and I have had this conversation almost from the day I started in 2009 about what's the role of Old Town versus the role of a renewed sort of suburban shopping center like the mall. And how do those now, maybe in a community the size of 155,400 like us, actually coexist and complement each other? And the reality is there are a lot of retailers that will go into this space that won't go into Old Town. And thank goodness, because I don't think what any of us wants in I'll speak for myself, what I don't want to see in Old Town is it become Anywhere USA and have all of the big name brands that you can see in any community be located in downtown. I'd rather create a purpose-built space for them to all exist together and have those two sorts of facilities still available for folks, but not necessarily have that occur in our downtown. And I think Matt and I are aligned about that. The other thing that I think is important is, as you make your way to Old Town, you want to have also a compelling experience. So Old Town, as Matt showed us in the 70s, was not a place that you might have chosen to go hang out. We do have along College Avenue places that also are beginning to move in that direction, right, to what Old Town was in the 70s, where they're starting to fall on less fortunate times. And so if we make sure that College is a well-functioning and invested in a thoroughfare into Old Town, that'll also continue to be beneficial for Old Town. So I think those are some ways that it complements. These are a few of the images that are what the redevelopment of Foothills will ultimately achieve. They're well underway. Just to give you some context, right now, Matt gave you the picture of the entrance as it sits today. This is the planned entrance after redevelopment. The image that Matt had of the folks sitting in kind of the sunken sitting space inside the mall is now, well, not now, but is where the fountain used to be, if you're familiar with the mall. And this is now where the fountain was. So again, we're starting to see the evolution. So they're going to actually lift the roof off and rebuild it. And this will be about a 40-foot ceiling height where they'll get clear story light and have a lot more natural light coming in. I actually had the pleasure of touring it where they've actually worked on the space between here and Macy's. They've already lifted the roof, added the windows, and have started the improvements from basically 12 stories up. They had a bunch of asbestos they had to abate. So they created this hermetically sealed tunnel that is the experience, if you've been there recently, you go through now. And above that is all this work going on. And when I first went up there, they were in the middle of abatement. And then when I went back about a month ago, they had the clear story. And it was just, it was phenomenal to see how much light is coming in. And I think it's going to make for a much better experience. This is a site plan of the mall. It gives you a sense. What I find interesting, the idea of the old is becoming new again, that Matt brought up earlier, is what I find something we're excited about is this is College Avenue at the west side of the property. And today, well, it's all torn up, but say 9 months ago, before they started tearing things apart, what you had is you had a very auto-oriented or nondescript sort of face to this major. This 70-acre parcel, I should have put that slide in. We had a slide where we transposed the footprint of the mall on the Old Town footprint. So the area that Matt focused on, the kind of the triangular shaped piece that is between the river and Mountain and College in Old Town, is almost roughly the same size. This is about a 70-acre parcel. And so when you look at the heart of our downtown and this parcel, they're about equal in size. But what we're doing is we're bringing the buildings back to College to create more of that urban feel. And you know, this is not the end of the life for this particular parcel. I imagine in another 40 or 50 years, somebody else will come in and have another idea for this site. And 70 acres is not a very common sized parcel for folks to be able to invest in. So when we were bringing the project forward, a lot of people said, well, why aren't you going for greater density? And why aren't you, you know, you can achieve so much more in the 70 acres, and you know, and you're putting money into a project that has a useful life of 20 years or what have you, and it, you know, and it's just gonna fall on hard times again. Well, as Matt showed us, you know, real estate lives through cycles. I think what we can do is continue to reinvest, and you know, this is a good solution for now, and it gets the site productive again, as well as what it does is it preserves it under one ownership for the future, which is not something that we have a lot of in our community. We, at the same time, the private sector has been making significant investments in redevelopment. We've also been investing in the public sector. Some of these projects you may be familiar with. This is MAX, a MAX bus, but if you haven't been on the MAX line, you should go ride it. My daughters love to ride it just because it's fun to ride. I actually, this summer, before it got cold and I started to use that as an excuse not to ride my bike, was actually riding my bike to the MAX stop and riding MAX into Old Town. And I have lived in Portland, and I've lived in London, England, and I've lived in Denver, and I really missed that time to myself that I used to have when I took mass transit in those other communities. And now we've got a facility to do that here in town, and it makes me very excited that we've got that. This is the Discovery Museum. Again, continue investment in Old Town. If you haven't been in, well, you guys took a field trip there, right? Yeah. What's that?
Some of us missed it.
Oh.
Other obligations.
Well, you should tell them that you missed it, and they should let you in to go check out the thing for free, right? I mean, why not? This is Highway 392 and I-25, also known as Carpenter Road. Highway 392 is at the southern edge of our town. In contrast, you know, we built this interchange in order to be able to facilitate the expansion of I-25, and not every interchange along I-25 had that foresight when it was reconstructed. And so again, I think that's just part of Fort Collins thinking ahead. And the automobile is with us, and I think will be with us for a while, particularly as a mode to travel between communities, even if we can reduce the amount we use them within our community. So significant number of projects has created you know, a good amount of economic development in our community. So, you know, what I was hoping to kind of cover with those slides is to reinforce that continuing to reinvest in our community, I think, is an important part of how we can manage and control where the community is heading as it continues to grow. I thought it was really almost shocking to me, the numbers that Matt shared with us about how quickly the community grew in its early history, and the reality is it has actually continued to grow at that pace. And I know it's a hot debate in the community as to whether or not we should grow. And where I come down on that particular issue, is that I don't know that we have any control over that. What we have control over is how we manage and react to it. There have been a number of communities that we could talk about that tried to control how they grew and had some pretty negative unintended consequences as a result. I want to take advantage of leveraging that excitement and talent and innovation and thinking that comes from new people coming to our community and figuring out how in 25 years is Fort Collins still have that DNA that I think we all like and love about our community still present, even though we're going to continue to grow. I think one of the keys to that is focusing our economic activities on innovation and really creating new ideas, particularly as it relates to what James and Bianca talk about in their book, The Sixth Wave, as kind of being this revolutionary concept of sustainability. The concept is that modern economics have really been driven since the Industrial Revolution by a series of waves of economic activity that start with a disruptive technology and end with a Great Recession. Does it sound familiar to anyone? Say maybe the advent of the digital age and the internet in 2008. Well, that's what they suggest, is that the first wave was really leveraging iron, water power, mechanization, textiles, right? The first great jump in productivity per worker. The second wave was steam power, the railroads, steel, and cotton. Again, another equally important jump in productivity per worker. Third wave, electricity, chemicals, internal combustion engines. Fourth wave, petrochemicals, electronics, aviation, the space race. The fifth wave, the digital networks. They're suggesting the sixth wave is really about no longer focusing on how do we extract more resources from our natural environment, but how do we leverage the resources we already have to a greater degree, and how do we start thinking about utilizing those resources in different ways to achieve greater things, and focusing on, again, a concept from Matt's speech about focusing on renewal and revitalization, and how do we translate that into economic activity in our community. So what is innovation? Well, innovation is the source of new ideas that are really focused on trying to figure out how do we maximize output. So how do we take the resources and achieve the most with them? And productivity is a measure of output per unit of input or per worker. And all of this is sort of leading towards, if we can leverage innovation and continue to create more productivity, which is what's happened in these 5 waves that precede the 6th wave that they're talking about, then we get greater prosperity. And in my mind, prosperity that is pervasive within our community is the objective of the work that I do. It's not to make more money for those that already have it. It's to make sure that our community overall has more activity in it, more economic opportunity for a greater number of folks within our community, and that those folks actually have opportunity, if they so choose, to be able to move through their career and achieve their own greater prosperity. So what do we have as assets for our community? Well, 49% of our working age population, I think this is the 26 and older, has a bachelor's degree. It's pretty unheard of. Obviously, being a college town, they usually have much higher numbers. Even compared to a lot of other college towns in the nation, we have a much higher educated population than you would expect to find. Little known fact when I moved here, but we have 5 federal facilities that have significant amount of research. CSU is 3rd behind MIT and Stanford in terms of patent production per research dollar. 3rd. Stanford and MIT are the only 2 that beat us. Again, for me, it's kind of shocking when you start looking at these things and think about what sort of the natural resources in terms of human capital are here in our community and what we might be able to do with that. Financial conditions are definitely improving, and then we have this quality of life or quality of place in our community that Matt talked a lot about through the conversation around Old Town. That is a natural attractant for folks. It's, in my opinion, the reason that it's almost you become a victim of your own success, right? It's so great here, other people want to be here too. And for me, it's kind of like, that's okay. I mean, I'm one of those transplants as well. And so it's more about how do we all work together, right, to keep that quality of place ever present. So we also have a ton of great networks that connect our assets. both our hard assets like physical incubation space, like the Rocky Mountain Innosphere, and CSU's Research Innovation Center, which is a biomedical research facility out on the Foothills campus. And one way we do that is industry clusters that focus on something we call the triple helix. So the city adopted 5 targeted industry clusters back in 2006. The concept here was that we were coming out of a recession at that time, the 2001-2002 recession, that very substantially hit the technology industry across the country, and actually, I think, more significantly impacted the city of Fort Collins than the most recent financial recession. And that was because we lost a significant number of what in the economic development industry we call primary jobs. A primary job is a job where at least 50% of the income that job, 50% of the funding that supports that job comes from outside the community. So what you're doing is you're growing the pie, the income pie in your community, because you're bringing money in from elsewhere. And this is the way the globalized economy works, right? Is no one place can be good at everything, and so specialization has happened, and that's why goods flow between communities. And so we're a part of that, and when you lose jobs that are related to that larger activity, it has a significant negative impact. The kinds of jobs we lost in 2008 to 2010 were largely construction jobs and other service sector jobs, and by no means do I want to disparage construction jobs. They're essential in the economy, but they live off of that idea of bringing income from elsewhere because it was the disposable income and houses and things like that that really had contracted earlier in the decade that resulted in additional contraction in the end of the decade. So the triple helix, let me come back to the clusters. So 5 targeted industry clusters the city adopted, and it was a reaction to trying to say, avoid where we had been, which was very deep but narrow in one industry, and trying to widen the pool of industry activity. And maybe, unfortunately, we've gotten a little shallower, and we're starting to work on that. But the 5 targeted industries are clean energy, water innovation, bioscience, technology, which was sort of our mature cluster. It's really around hardware and enterprise software. And then the 5th one, uniquely Fort Collins, or the triple B, beers, bands, bikes. Some have said there's a 4th B. Can you guess? Bud? Marijuana? I don't want to go there yet. We'll see how that all shakes out. Right now we're focused on 3 Bs, beers, bikes, bands. It's really trying to capture that X factor that's kind of that has made and continues to make Fort Collins unique and hip and a place that people want to be. And so what the clusters, those 5 industry clusters do, the city has been supporting activities in that space to try to draw together the public sector, the private sector, and then the research or academic space. And we've had some great success. Fort Zed being an example of that. And then there's a culture here that I think is pretty unique to Fort Collins. I think it comes out of that technology background. There's a willingness to collaborate and also a willingness to risk. It's something, about 4 years ago, I got the opportunity to go to Austin and talk with them about how they do economic development and support innovation in their community. And every single person we talked to said, in Austin, we want to help people fail quickly, because failure is what you learn from and you move on to the next idea, and you have to fail to succeed. And the point there was, how do you do it in an inexpensive and fast way? Because that's what leads to the most impactful innovation. And I think we have that willingness in the private sector for sure to take risk. Because this is the challenge, right, that we're trying to help new ideas overcome. We call it the valley of death, right? If this is profit or loss and this is time, right, you start spending a lot of money to develop an idea before you ever start bringing in revenue and can climb back up out of that valley of death. And so a big part of what my office works on when we're working in the innovation ecosystem is, how do you make this shallower and narrower if possible, or how do you make it so that somebody can stop in this space, right, and say, haven't got it, haven't figured it out, and start over, as opposed to, you know, getting all the way to the bottom of the valley before they realize they don't have something that's going to work. So as I talked about, strengthening networks is a big part of what we do, bringing together the triple helix. Each part of the triple helix has strengths and weaknesses, and what we're finding is that when you bring them together, their strengths can offset the other's weaknesses, and you get one of these situations where 1 + 1 = 3, and you're getting something much, much greater. You end up with greater innovation reach. You end up with actual real projects is what we're seeing come out of these clusters. So Fort Zed, or the Fort Collins Zero Energy District, which focuses on Old Town, the river area, and CSU, is a perfect example of that. It was the brainchild of a number of folks, some within University Connections, which was another sort of grassroots effort to get community members to come together to talk about town-gown relationships and how do you make those fruitful, as well as the Colorado Clean Energy Cluster, which at that time was known as the Northern Colorado Clean Energy Cluster, which the city had helped, along with a couple of other entities, to fund and get started. And what their sort of big, hairy, audacious goal was to basically take that area and make it what we call grid neutral. So that means that the energy that's used within that area would have no impact on the larger grid, meaning that they would either conserve energy or produce energy within the district or very near to the district through renewable resources, such that they didn't really have to rely on other sources of energy. And they've had a couple of great successes at achieving some of those, or at least proving the concept up. So that's what I mean when I say we get real projects that come out. And those real projects, obviously, they have local benefit. In the case of Fort Zed, we reduced our energy consumption in that area. That's good for the community over the long run. They've also had economic health benefit. Some of the companies involved, Spray, for instance, which is a company that just converted the old Whistle Stop car wash in Old Town into an office building, was able to demonstrate some of their technology and software, and as a result, gained more clients as a result of that project. And in the end, what we're doing is we're creating ideas or innovations that we can export, right? Because sending our ideas and our innovations out into the world is what brings money back. So if we're going to specialize in something and be a member and a partner and a participant in that global economy, what is going to be our specialization? And we're focused on these 5 industry clusters. And so we have a culture, but you've got to build it and bring it together. And the concept is that this objective of a healthy and resilient economy really comes out. It's not something I and my office do all alone, but it's something that all of our partners in the community, and really the community, does. And these are just a handful of our partners. But I mean, everybody's involved, even residents and businesses are involved as well in terms of making our economy strong and helping to influence the culture of innovation. And so it comes down to relationships is a big part of the fuel for our economy. Whether it be human capital that's coming out of the school district, Front Range, Ames Community College, CSU, University of Northern Colorado, or the workforce that is attracted here by the companies that we have. They all become an essential ingredient in our economic engine. The networks we have, whether they be the targeted industries or the strength of our nonprofits, or alumni from CSU, alumni from HP. I talk with a lot of folks when they say, what do you think is something that Fort Collins has that a lot of other places don't have? I say, well, we have a lot of people who came here to work for HP and then decided they didn't want to leave. They know a lot of really good things. In fact, a lot of them have gone out and created their own jobs because there weren't jobs for them to go into when they were ready to leave HP, or when HP asked them to leave.
Something happened with Kodak in another generation.
Absolutely. So we can't overlook those kinds of networks that get created through what has happened in the past. And then again, I said we have a real focus in our community on place and stewardship of that place, and also stewardship of our natural resources that I think is a great part of our culture. So the question for the tape was, so when Woodward came to this community almost 60 years ago, they brought with it this sense of they were a heavy industry, and they moved into a residential neighborhood, or at least adjacent to one. And they've been such great stewards of that relationship over their time at that facility. Will they bring that same sense of sort of neighborhood stewardship and relationship with adjacent properties to their new site? And I think absolutely. In fact, I think it's a cultural value of Woodward's. And part of the reason that we were so excited to have them become a partner with the city and the DDA in terms of redeveloping that particular site. Because some of the options for the site that they're going on maybe wouldn't have achieved the same kind of stewardship that Woodward's able to achieve. Woodward has dedicated back 30 acres of the 100 they purchased along the river as natural area. That area is being rehabilitated, if you will, to its natural state to create habitat for wildlife, as well as to give the river an opportunity to act more naturally in that space. And so I think, yes, I think absolutely. And I also think in terms of evolving this concept of stewardship, some have said while Woodward's site at Drake is beautiful, it also has an inordinate amount of bluegrass in an area that's primarily an arid climate. And so, part of the conversation we've had with Woodward is how do you achieve that same aesthetic, but you do it in a way that recognizes maybe more natural vegetation. So absolutely, I think it's something that is a part of the Woodward site. Oh, the question was, did Woodward do the dedication of the 30 acres through the Legacy Land Trust? And the answer is no, it was directly just a relationship between the city and Woodward. The property is part of the city's natural areas program. I wonder why I lost my... All right, well, I'll hit this stuff. I've talked about triple bottom line, so I'll go through that quickly. Bruce, my boss, loves to talk about Maslow's hierarchy and how it really impacts human nature, right? So your physiological needs, safety, security, social, self-esteem, self-actualization. So again, for us, the social aspect of our triple bottom line thinking is essential. If we can't help people get past basic survival aspects, they can't be engaged in being good stewards of the natural environment, full participants in the economic system. We've talked about a ton of these successes already, so I won't re-impact that. One of the things as we look to the future that we're very conscious of is climate change. I'm not going to get into the debate of why. I believe that it's happening. I believe it's happening for the reasons the scientists say it's happening, and that it's something that is going to impact the way we act as human beings on this planet, whether we want to think about it or not. And so we need to start being proactive the same way that we've been proactive around transportation with Max, the same way we've been proactive with historic renovation around Old Town, of thinking about what kinds of impacts will this new outside influence have on our community, and where do we go from there. Because as we know, and these are pictures from our community, this is the High Park fire on the left, taken by members of Poudre Fire Authority as they chipped in and worked on containing that fire. My parents lost their garage, thankfully not their home, in Glacier View up in Red Feathers as a result of that fire. And this is the Poudre River during the floods of just over a year ago. This is College Avenue. The Discovery Park is right there. As you can see, we did not bear the brunt of that event. And so we already had a significant impact. Thankfully, through good management of the river, we did not have any businesses impacted, and certainly no residences. We've actually had a program of purchasing residential property that was within the 500, I think the 100-year floodplain and even the 500-year floodplain for many, many decades now. So we don't have very many at-risk neighborhoods. That being said, Buckingham neighborhood, which is off the picture here to the east, was actually evacuated because of concerns that the river might flood up and impact them. So how are we doing? Well, the city's had some goals around reducing its carbon reduction for quite some time, and we're actually engaged right now in a conversation about significantly accelerating and deepening that commitment to carbon reduction with an objective of being I think it's 30 by 20, so it's 30% carbon reduction from 2005. No, 20% by 2030, 80% by 2030. I can't. 80% carbon reduction by 2030 from our 2005 level, and carbon neutrality by 2050. So as you can see, we were doing pretty well until recently, and it started to uptick again. These are just some comparisons to give you a sense. So this is population in red. This is our consumptive spending through the sales and use tax measure as well, because those things impact, carbon production. The history has been long within the community about thinking about this. It really goes back to the very first resolution that came out of a citizens advisory group. Well, there was one advisory group formed in '97, and then the first local climate action plan in 1999. ClimateWise came out of that, which is a program of engaging with businesses on a voluntary basis to help them reduce their carbon. We have an update to the climate action plan in 2008, and we're working on one right now, as I said, based on that objective of 80% carbon reduction by 2030. So how do you get there? Well, there's a variety of ways of getting there. One way of getting there is, again, this theme of the old becoming new again, is creating communities that are not dependent on the automobile. If we reduce our reliance on vehicles, we can remove a significant amount of VMT. Energy production is about 50% of our carbon emissions come from electricity right now in our community, and I think 30 to 35% come from the transportation fleet. So if we can solve those two issues, we're the lion's share of the way there. And one of the ways we get there is by thinking about land use differently. And to Matt's point about how do you make MAX successful? Well, MAX is just one incremental step along a path towards a variety of different community objectives, one of which being less carbon emissions in our community. Yep, so the city absolutely has a lot of influence because we are the regulatory entity that provides oversight of any construction. So we control the building permits. We also control land use. So absolutely we had significant influence over that property. I think that, oh, sorry. The question was how much influence did the city have over the Summit property, which is the student housing project on the west side of College just south of Prospect. And so we are the regulatory agency that oversaw the construction of that building, so we had a ton of influence on it from that perspective. I think there are 2,400 employees within the city. You'll probably get 2,400 opinions, personal opinions, if you ask them about the Summit project. I think overall, yes, it delivered on the vision for College Avenue, which is that it's our spine and that we want it to intensify. Obviously, we can get better at how we do that. Many folks don't like the architecture, but I think that scale of intensity is definitely what's contemplated in our community's comprehensive plan, city plan, and is contemplated in the future if we're going to continue to achieve our goals around carbon reduction and sort of manage the influx of folks coming to our community. And this is, I think this is a very important implementation issue, right? Which is the objective is to try to reduce the reliance on the vehicle, but that's a future state that we haven't yet achieved. So how do you get from where we are today to where we want to be? And yeah, we've learned a few lessons from that project about things. I can tell you that even though our standards don't require a minimum amount of parking, that developer is running into the same issue in many other communities. Tucson, they didn't build enough parking. Eugene, Oregon, they didn't build enough parking. I think there was some interpretation of millennials' preferences that they didn't want a car. That, I think, is true for day-to-day activities, but not if they're going to do some of the things that a community like Fort Collins has to offer just outside its boundaries on the weekend. So, yeah, or to get there in the first place. We're probably almost out of time. The last few slides just really talk about our role through the division in terms of addressing some of the other things that go on in our community that are part of the triple bottom line around homelessness and affordable housing, and helping to influence those through policy. But I think what I'll do is I'll just jump to the end, and then that way we can have a few more questions before we run out of time. I think we got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Yes, sir. Yeah. Certainly. Well, the question was, what is the city's take on the role of OtterBox and Blue Ocean in downtown and their acquisition of quite a bit of property and sort of dominance in a certain area, given that they may or may not be sold in the future, and the future then might be uncertain about their presence here in Fort Collins. It's a concern. I think that the OtterBox is such a roaring success, and even if they were to leave at some point in the future, I think they've had a lasting impact for the better on our community. I don't know that if there's a sale that takes place, that means they leave. It depends on who the purchaser is. I think that Kurt Richardson and the success of OtterBox is a perfect story for what can happen when you focus on innovation in a community for economic activity. I do think, though, that we may not be able to contain all of the innovation that we precipitate. And so I don't know if that's a bad thing per se. They do control a lot of property in Old Town. I don't know, Matt, if you want to add anything to that question.
Okay. I think that one of the other things to consider with the model that OtterBox is employing now is the properties, they have kind of a two-part investment strategy right now. And one of those strategies provides space for the OtterBox company. The other is a secondary real estate development arm that is really advancing ideas that aren't even associated with OtterBox. The Downtown Development Authority, for example, just recently reviewed the designs for a renovation of a building on the 200 block of Linden Street. So they're looking at investments in the historic core, not just in some of the outer vacant lot areas of the downtown. And they will be acting in that role through the real estate development arm, Blue Ocean, and leasing that space to a company called Galvanize, which is, they provide space for, it's incubation space for technology startup companies. And so again, not even affiliated with OtterBox. So there's diversification occurring. So that's something I think that bodes well positively for the future. And I have not heard anything about Kurt or Nancy, if the company were to sell, that they would leave the area. And really they are I think the talent and the brains behind that. So usually entrepreneurs end up repeating things over again, so that's a positive.
I think the other positive about the way, OtterBox really bought into the Old Town approach, right? Incrementalism. They didn't come in and, clear out a bunch of blocks and build some big campus. They've built a series of, buildings. So, those buildings will have life well beyond the current occupant. Thank you.